people kind of suck, and and
just
really,
a little bit,
right?
Hello, everybody. Welcome to Fractured Faith and Mosaic of Belief. This is your host, Joshua Hopping.
And I am Angel Ford.
And we are joined today with a special guest, my wife, Emily.
Hello.
Yay!
She's joining us today in this very special podcast episode talking about church attendance. Mm-hmm. Oh, no. Some of you may be wondering what's so controversial about just going to church, but it actually is, especially in the day and age where the last several decades, people's been really focused on showing up, and pastors and church leaders have all talked about the importance of being there Sunday morning. Mm-hmm. And we've heard, statistically, have been hearing a lot how people are not going to church. So it really has become a very hot topic. So we're going to dig into that a little bit.
Yeah, because Emily really wanted to talk about this. And I feel like that's important to include in the podcast. Emily really wants to talk about this.
Really?
Really?
Really.
All right. So, Emily, what is it about this?
To start this?
Yeah.
Well, the last time that I was on the podcast, we had talked a bit about my current reluctance to go to church as much as I might have in the past. I mean, I grew up very much with that mindset of that's just what you do. On Sunday morning, you always go to church. Mm-hmm. And COVID really broke a lot of people out of that habit because we weren't going on Sunday mornings. We discovered we could hear great sermons just online from the comfort of our pajamas. Mm-hmm. And a lot of us kind of fell out of that habit. And so it left a lot of people after that trying to figure out, okay, is it worth trying to get back to that habit? What is it that I'm really looking for from a church? Mm-hmm. And what is the significance of that? Mm-hmm. And so I thought it would be interesting to talk about.
It would be. Let's talk about it.
Okay. So as the resident pastor, can you start it off, Angel, with the scriptures? What does the scriptures say about attending church on Sunday morning?
You know, there are no actual scriptures that says you must attend church on Sunday morning. No. I mean, there's kind of the common scriptures that we know, like in Hebrews 10, where it talks about, not giving up or discouraging from gathering one another, and in fellowship and spurring each other on for love and good deeds and stuff. And the heart behind that, as I understand it, is like it's all about encouraging one another. And when I think about, why do we attend on a Sunday versus just catching it at home because it's service, I think it's important to go to your why. Like, it's very easy for it to be a legalistic thing. Mm-hmm. And I know in my background that was kind of is like, oh, so-and-so didn't come to every single service, right? Like, there's a Sunday morning, a Sunday evening, and a Wednesday evening service. And, like, you go to all of them. And if you don't, well, why, right? So it could definitely become this legalistic thing, but it doesn't have to be.
Yeah, well, I think that's really the crux of the matter is it legalistic? Do you have to show up or not? Even what you mentioned here about Sunday morning, Sunday evening, Wednesday, a lot of churches have moved away from that.
Right.
Right, and it's just Sunday morning for a lot of times. You may have a home group throughout the week, but you rarely do have Wednesday evening services. At least the churches here in Idaho, I really have not seen that.
Right. That was a big cultural shift when I came out here from Western Oregon. My home church is, I could not find a church that did Wednesday evenings, and it was hard to find one that even did Sunday evenings.
Right. Let's come on to it. So I think coming back on there, and we think again, thinking at the scriptures, because when you think about church attendance, the word church, of course, ecclesia, called out ones that are called out. Actually, the Greek has a very much of almost a political kind of tone to them, where in the Roman Empire, whenever a messenger came, they would cry, the politicians or the kind of citizens will come out and gather in the ecclesia to be able to have a conversation about what's happening with the empire. And that kind of word, Paul starts using that for church. You do see in the scriptures a lot of gatherings. You see that in Acts. You see that in even in the Gospels, where the Jewish synagogues were meeting and people were gathering together. So there is a lot of talk throughout the scriptures, even in the Old Testament, about gathering in a temple or the synagogues and such coming in, of gathering. But to your point, there's no verse that deliberately says you must gather at this time and place.
Right.
And even further is you have the question of why Sunday, right, versus Saturday.
Right.
Saturday,
Which some people do.
Some people do, right? And that's been, I think, even a big distinction of like the Seventh-day Adventists are really big on that one, because the Saturday was the concept of the Sabbath, and then the church shifted it to Sunday. So all that background comes into it is, do people as Christian followers, do they need to show up? Like, what is the value of going to church? So that's open. I got two ladies here to stare at me blankly here. I need some conversation here.
Well, I actually did go to church this morning.
You
which,
did.
Does
And
not
so
always
many
happen.
people commented, like, Emily, you're here. Oh my goodness.
And I do think that one of the things that does keep me coming back is the corporate worship. There is definitely something special about that experience of singing these songs together with a whole bunch of other people. Like, it feels like the Holy Spirit really does show up during those times. I mean, I've even heard stories from non-Christians who had a church background, who, even though they won't necessarily recognize that it's the Holy Spirit, like, they would recognize that there was something special about those corporate worship times. Like, they could feel that there was something during those times.
Right.
So yeah, that's definitely one of the biggest draws for me, that I don't feel like you can really get from watching the worship on a TV. It's just not quite the same.
Right. Well, and I think it's also important to like define, what do we mean when we say church, right? Because there's so many different ways to define it. Like, there's church, a building that you go to. There is church, just the congregation of people, which doesn't even have to happen in a building and doesn't have to be constrained to a day or time. So I think, as far as, like, personally, going to a building on a certain day and time, I don't think that's necessarily biblical. I do think it is biblical that we have to engage in fellowship, whether it's for corporate worship or even, like, the purpose of the church, right? It's like for that outreach, caring for others, the Great Commission, all those things. So I think, like, that context of church we need to engage in. But building church on a weekly basis, I still say do it, but that's probably because I'm a major extrovert and my soul would die if I didn't. But I don't know. I think that's dependent on the person.
So you're willing to accept my attendance to Tuesday night small group as...
Yes. Me with zero authority on the matter, I do approve.
So, Emily, you have mentioned, you say, reluctant to go to church. Can you kind of unpack that a little bit? Because for those who are listening who may not be aware, can you kind of talk about why you don't attend church on a regular basis, especially since you said your background was one that it was a big importance. You've been a pastor and a worship leader in the past. So how did you go from somebody who was there pretty much every week, leading worship, being very involved in leadership of the church, to somebody now who's sitting back going, maybe not?
So yes, I come from growing up in the church, attending every Sunday, teaching Sunday school, church planting as an adult, doing all the things, to pulling back a little bit more. Part of that is just because of my journey towards becoming more LGBTQ affirming and recognizing some of the injury done by the church over the years to various groups of people. And I think it's my heart of compassion that feels like I should be standing with them, and to a certain extent boycotting the groups that have hurt them. I have definitely had to struggle with my own feelings on the matter. I'm hoping will make a difference when we are able to get ourselves into a church that is more affirming. I'll be interested to see how that affects my consistency with attending. But it definitely has been a little bit hard for me. COVID was kind of what got us started taking a break, but during that whole time also just struggling with some of those concepts of how do I deal with organized religion when organized religion has caused so much damage over the years. I will say that, a lot of churches are incredibly open and loving places. E3 would be one of those that we definitely feel like we can be accepted even if we don't believe the exact same things that everybody else does, which is definitely huge. We appreciate that, and that's one of the reasons that we're there. I would like to point out that I was actually the first one that started going to E3, even before Joshua did. I was not particularly consistent, but there are definitely those times when I feel like I just need that extra dose of getting to feel the presence of the Holy Spirit in a group of believers all together in one place. So I definitely do still see value, but I will admit I allow life to get in the way. Between my health and the kids' health, like there's often an excuse of some kind or another that might be a little bit easier to push past if I was feeling a little bit more passionate about attending church, I suppose. Mm-hmm.
So thank you, Emily. I appreciate sharing that kind of insight and your thought process on there. And I think for a lot of people who are listening, and if you go by statistics within the country, there's been a lot of people with that same kind of mentality. It really was where COVID really kind of showed a lot of people that did not have to go to church because, again, you got podcasts, you have streaming services, a lot of big churches, really brilliant speakers and theologians and pastors and teachers can be broadcasting their sermons on TV and radio and kind of around the web, basically. Mm-hmm. Now, TV and radio has been growing. It's been around for decades, from like the 50s and 60s, and probably radios back into the 30s or whatnot. And I know a lot of pastors have taken advantage of that. But with the internet, it's gotten more and more so. And people have gotten more and more disconnected. We see a lot more individuals who are rather stay home than go out. A lot more introverted rather than kind of going out and fighting traffic and trying to find a spot. And that's value. I mean, that's valid kind of conversation. The other piece to it, which I think is almost a little bit deeper, is kind of listening to or thinking about how the organized church has harmed people. Mm-hmm. And I think to me, that's one of the biggest questions to deal with. Because we do live in a time where you have a lot of churches, a lot of pain coming out of churches. You've had a lot of sexual scandals come in, a lot of abuse. The Southern Baptists, for kind of in the big news articles and information, recent years came out against them with being able to move pastors and leaders around to different places instead of actually, addressing the cover-ups that are happening. The Roman Catholics had it. We've had pretty much every group of church background has had it. Those are the ones that hit the news, and that's the reason I'm calling them out. Mm-hmm. But pretty much, if you pick a church or church group, you're just going to be there, right?
Right.
And we talk about sometimes the theology of being able to, that led to, damages, right? And I think one of the theologies that people have hit is you have to attend church. And to be a good Christian, you have to attend church. And then some of that, then the pastor wants they have to keep the lights on. So there's amount of tithe and money mm-hmm. issue that come into. There is a business aspect to running a church. Again, there's lights, there's salaries, there's mortgages, there's ministry opportunities that just takes money. Mm-hmm. In order for you to get money, you have to have people show up to be able to give. Otherwise, you can't turn the lights on.
Right.
Now, this is also the same for pretty much every other kind of media and different types of work as well, and organizations as well. Mm-hmm. Even your nonprofit organizations have to have some kind of money, a food pantry or, advocacies of any kind. There's some sort, currency has to be involved.
Right.
So because of that, though, I think a lot of pastors have really emphasized the need of church attendance because they really are trying to keep the lights on, and there is a healthiness of being able to see people, and it's easier to be able to pastor or care or talk to people when you see them, right, rather than being in their house, out of sight, out of mind kind of mentality. Does that make sense a little bit?
For sure.
So there's a lot of that coming into them, but that pain is such a real thing. There was in my Native American background, I was talking to some other Native Americans and about Jesus, and they were very aghast about how a Indian could be a follower of Jesus because of the boarding school scandals that recently came out in the last couple of years, where you had, as a Native American, we've always known about this, but basically over the last 100 years, the American government, the Canadian government would kidnap and take children from their homes, putting into boarding schools in an attempt to remove the Indian and keep the human out of them, make them good white American people instead of letting them have the culture. So they were beaten for speaking their language or their customs and culture. And a lot of them died. Thousands of them died. Recently, the President Biden actually had an official apology to the Native Americans for that just a couple months ago in October, which is just the first time. It was just amazing because the first time the United States government has admitted to the failures that they did to their people, and to have a white male president say that meant a lot, because it was largely white males, Americans, who led the destruction, right? Mm-hmm. So if it was like President Barack Obama, it wouldn't have meant as much, because again, you have somebody of color who's actually admitting to problems of color and race, and it's like, well, yeah, his lived experience is one that he is more aware of that. Right. But to have somebody who more on that social top rung of our caste system be able to call it out was big. But those are barriers for people who kind of not to come to church. So Angel, as a pastor, and hearing all this about the emotions and such, what do you tell people? How do you talk to people who are on that fence? So what is the value of coming to church, knowing that there could be abuses, there could be problems, there can be a lot of issues, a lot of triggers, especially your mental health background. Right. Why?
Yeah. Well, you got to zoom in and then you got to zoom out, because there's so many different ways to approach it depending on how you're looking at it. For the individual who's coming to me and talking to me about it, I'm meeting them where they're at, right? Because even with having church abuse and church trauma, the way that looks like for Sue is not the same way it's going to look for Paul. And so they may need different things. And so we're going to talk about that first, if that's my place to talk to them about it, or maybe they need to go talk to their therapist or their pastor or someone for that type of help, because someone may genuinely want to come back, but they're just so triggered from their abuse that they can't. And there's inner turmoil just in that. What do you call it? I'm doing this with my hands, like a tornado of emotions, right? It's like you want to do this, but you can't for these reasons. So first, if you need therapy, go to therapy. And yeah, I think that's the first thing, is go to therapy. Also, asking yourself, why is church important to you? If you're even considering still coming back, even after having some type of church hurt, or just culturally looking around and being like, man, there's this group of people who I really love, and I just see from a cultural standpoint, they're being harmful. Considering for a moment, people kind of suck. And
and just really, a little bit,
right? And any type of organization, regardless of if it's a church or a nonprofit or a for-profit, if it's in the education system, we have not seen a single organization type that has not been hurt because people are involved and people are acting corruptly when they get to the top. So people have and are using the Bible to hurt people, right? The religious leaders used it to literally murder Jesus. So that is just historically always in our book. But we don't look at that and say oh, well, we're just going to not engage in this because people have used it to hurt other people, right? Because then we can just not engage in society in general, if that's our line of thinking.
I think there's some who have retreated to the Fortnite
of
Minecraft.
I have considered, how many times have you heard me say, like, burn it down, like, just put me on 10 acres, like, I'll make sourdough bread, I don't care. But I don't. I live in a cul-de-sac, so, also, this idea of I don't have to go to church to get what I need. Like, I can watch it on podcasts or YouTube or, live streaming, and there's these big charismatic preachers and they give me what I need. I don't really like that argument or that sentiment because it's very much like a consumeristic mindset, and that's not what Jesus called us into. Like, in our bones, we are designed as social creatures. Like, that's why solitary confinement is literally torture, and we're not allowed to do that, is because we need people. And so if we treat church as I'm here for me and this is for me, and then I get to go home and take a nap and then eat a pot roast, like, we've really missed the point in what church is and why we engage in it.
I think that is definitely some very important kind of to bring that out there, because a lot of times in American Christianity specifically, we have prioritized the sermon and the information that were gained from the sermon, right?
Right.
Churches' attendance tend to be, did the preacher preach a good sermon or not? Was I entertained by that service? Did he do a good job? Oracle skills. And because, again, we just want that information.
Right.
Where what you've mentioned is less about the information and more about the relationship. Would that be kind of an accurate deal?
Oh, for sure.
So how do you gain the relationship when our churches are designed for information?
I mean, I feel like I've done a good job of it.
Extrovert.
First of all, be an extrovert.
But that doesn't work for us introverts.
Right. If you're not an extrovert and you are an introvert, going with a friend who will help you connect. Like, there are people out there who, what is the joke that introverts don't make friends, extroverts just go out and adopt the introverts? So if you're an introvert and you want to go to church, find one of your extrovert friends who has already adopted you and will take you to church, and just start there. Like, I guarantee you the extrovert friend will introduce you to 10 more people when they walk you through the doors. Also, if service starts at 10, don't show up at 10:05.
What?
Yeah. Because in order to converse with people, you have to give time and space to converse with people. It's a novel concept. But, show up at like 9:40 and hang out in the lobby. And, the contemporary churches these days, we have the coffee, we have the water with lemon in it, we have like 3 different carbs to choose from. So just gather around the watering hole, talk to someone about how great this, egg casserole tastes, and just have a conversation.
So, Emily, as somebody who's kind of averse to going, what do you think about that? Would that entice you? Do you need to have an extrovert to drag you along?
Well, I mean, it would definitely help. But I was actually going to say one of the things that we've noticed over the years, kind of starting out in different churches and talking to people having difficulty connecting, one of the really good ways to build relationships is to find a ministry to plug into.
Yeah.
And because when you're actually doing things with other people, that's when those conversations naturally come about. As an introvert, standing in the lobby for 20 minutes before church, I might not actually talk to anybody.
That's why you go with your extroverted friend.
Yes, that helps, but you don't always have one of those.
Fair.
So I would say that, for example, I've never been able to connect with Angel very well on a Sunday morning because she's always got a million people who want to talk to her. So it's going to her house on Tuesday evening for small group is where we actually get to know each other.
Right.
So whether it's ministry or a small group or some other aspect of church life, I think that's honestly the easiest way to get to know people, because Sunday mornings, there's just so much going on. You're not always going to be able to make those kinds of connections, particularly not as an introvert.
Right. And I don't know if you've felt this, but I've known other people who have felt this, who have, been hesitant about going back into a building on a Sunday morning is that this idea of like plugging into ministries is maybe the cynical and not always untrue experience of, oh, they just need more volunteers.
Yeah, and well, even for my journey, for those who listening may not know, was I used to be a senior pastor, and I've been around for a while, but coming into my most recent church I'm at now for the last probably 3 years, I was hyper aware of not wanting to be pulled in or guilted into volunteering.
Right.
And I actually turned down multiple volunteering efforts because I'm like, I kind of wanted to get to know people, but I didn't want to be used by people.
Right.
Because I know that happens. And
Yes.
I know that I have done that in the past. Even with the best intentions in the world, you still have to get the chairs set up. You still have to get the things set up, the tables set up. If you're in a church building that you're tearing down and setting up all the time, rather than maybe having a static location, which I haven't been to a church that had a static location in years. Most of my churches have all been like tear down, set up kind of churches.
Yeah.
But, those volunteers, you're like, sometimes it's off-putting. And also from being careful about trigger words, that's where, again, coming out of some of the, I guess, religious trauma, and the more I unpack that, the more I probably have dealt with that without, or not dealt with it.
Right.
Angel, we might have to have a session later on, but maybe this is why I'm starting the podcast.
Right.
But say, hey, I watch when I went to the recent church I'm going to now. I'm like, how are they asking for volunteers? How are they asking for money? Are they guilting you into money, or are you guilting them into volunteering? What does that look like? I think those were big things that I was hyper aware of near the beginning when I first started attending. Because if I had a church that was very much about you have to give your 10%. If you're not giving your 10%, you're not a real Christian. You're not loving God. That's a big turnoff. I'll be like, I'm out of here, right? Where the pastor of the church at the time was like, well, here's our offering opportunity, and it has like a QR code or offering in the back. If you want to give, great. If you don't, great. And it was very much open-handedness. The opportunity was there, but it's not forcing you. And I think that was definitely being more aware of our culture and our time. And a lot more people are skittish on that one, because we've had those very fundamental kind of things of it. If you don't do A, then you're not a Christian.
Right.
And that goes back to really one of those earlier first podcast episodes we had, which who's a Christian? What is Christianity, right? And being aware of that bound set of trying to actually lock somebody into that one.
Right. And I think also in the ministry, like finding a ministry that you enjoy, that you feel a calling in, can really help with that volunteer mindset. Like, there are so many things to do at our church that I would love to volunteer at, but I just don't have the bandwidth. I think that's one of the curses of being an extrovert, is that I say yes to a lot of things because I genuinely want to do the thing. But I am still just a person with a limited capacity of energy. And so I have to just volunteer for the things that I really feel called to do. And I think if more people approached it that way, they weren't like this obligation of, oh, well, they need people to help set up chairs. And even though I can't really do it, like I feel like I need to, even if they're not directly telling me that, recognizing like that's not the point. Ministries are supposed to fill your bucket, not drain you. And it might drain you a bit because it does involve engagement and energy, but it needs to be a net positive, spiritually speaking.
We tend to say, is it life-giving?
Life-giving.
Yeah.
Yes.
Do you feel like it's taking away years of your life, or is it actually adding on? Is it enriching your life? Yeah.
Right.
So definitely, making sure you're not getting so overextended that then you end up throwing in the towel for everything because you just can't handle it. I was gonna say, A lot of times there are like one-off type volunteer opportunities that might be a little bit more easy to start with. So like the food drive is a really good example, or some of those other outreach type things. You don't feel quite so much like you're being sucked in by the church vortex that is trying to get all this work out of you, and more of a, well, this is a good chance to rub shoulders with people in the church, but at the same time, it's an outreach to the community, which might be something that you can believe in a little bit more, but then also know that it's finite. This isn't an ongoing thing they're going to try to suck me into a regular schedule for.
Right.
Which helps.
Yeah. So if I listen to kind of wrap up and kind of bring us in, is what I'm hearing is church attendance is not a requirement to follow Jesus. Being around people is, I would probably say.
Sure.
Grant, I guess there's always the hermits and the monks that are kind of retreating back out, but
we'll call that individual callings.
Individual callings, right?
You got to think a lot of those monks were doing it together.
Yes, a lot of the monks were. The hermits were less so, but a lot of the monks definitely were in community. And I guess that goes back to the key, it's in community. Yeah. So whether that is a micro church, which is a kind of a home church of maybe 2, 3 people, 4 people gathering together, or a church of 60 to a church of like 6,000 or in the hundreds, it doesn't really matter the size per se. It's really are you connecting with people?
Right.
It's not about being entertained. It's not about the information that you're gathering. It really is, are you getting to know people, so that I would kind of say that when the bad things happen, when the crap hits a fan per se, you actually have people to call on.
Exactly.
To kind of help you be able to, fix a tire, or bring a casserole to your house when you're sick, or give you a ride, or all those different things that happens because life does continue. And if that faith community is not in that way, then I'd be questioning that faith community, quite frankly.
Sure.
But it gives, I think the main thing with this topic, as we kind of talk through it and we think about fractured faith, is being able to give people, there's no shame in not going to church.
Right.
And letting people know that is an option, and they don't have to feel horrible, or they're not a Christian, or they're not a Jesus follower because they're not going to church. Right. Which I know, again, is counterculture. It seems so simple, but it actually is counter to a lot of the talking points that we have from a lot of the big name church speakers and pastors and leaders. And so by being able to back off and say, hey, we have grace. We have grace. If it's a small church, big church, whatever else, you don't have to show up every week. There is time where life hits, and that's okay.
Well, I was going to say, I've been in a variety of moms groups over the years that we've had some of the ladies have said, yeah, this is my church. That I'm not really in the position to be able to attend on Sunday morning, but I get a lot of that same kind of fellowship and fulfillment from this group of ladies that get together and get to be part of each other's lives.
Yeah,
exactly. So, all right. So you have a mosaic of thought processes for you. Thank you, Emily, for joining us. Angel, thank you again for your insight. And hopefully you guys join us next time on Fractured Faith.